Daisy Jones and the Six is a fictional oral history of the rise and fall of a 70s rock band. So it's the story of this band, Daisy Jones and the Six, who becomes the biggest band of the 1970s, and then they break up one night after a show in July of 1979. And it's the story of why they broke up and how they rose to fame in the first place. My book that came out last year is called The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and it's about a movie star in Hollywood in the 1960s. And I really liked the idea of continuing to write about Los Angeles, but moving it to the Sunset Strip on the 70s. And when I thought about my favorite music from the 70s, it was a lot of that Southern California sound: Fleetwood Mac, the Eagles, Linda Ronstadt, Jackson Browne, and the Laurel Canyon scene from the 60s. There's Joni Mitchell and Crosby, Stills and Nash, and the Mamas and the Papas. I just got really excited and sort of nostalgic for that time. And it became inspiring enough that I felt like I could spend a lot of time there and really lose myself in that period of time. So I got very excited to really dig in. Daisy Jones is, when we first meet her, she is a teenager who is living in the Hollywood Hills right behind the Sunset Strip in the late 60s. And she's beautiful, and she's been born with a lot of money, and her parents are completely indifferent to her existence. And so she's really looking for somewhere to belong. And she finds a place for herself in the world of rock on the Sunset Strip. And essentially she starts out as a groupie. She's hanging out with all of these musicians, and she meets her friend Simone. And in meeting Simone, she starts to find a place where she belongs a little bit. But on the Sunset Strip, when she's hanging out with these musicians, they're mostly interested in what she looks like, and she's much more interested in sharing what she has to say. And so that's her journey, is in trying to find a place in this world of rock where someone is interested in the art that she's creating. I feel like I started with the germ of Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham and Fleetwood Mac. That was really very exciting because I'd always been fascinated by them ever since I was a kid. And that's where it started. And then I just, in my research and listening to more music and familiarizing myself with some of these bands that I probably should have been more familiar with before, I got really into Bruce Springsteen, Tom Petty, again, like Linda Ronstadt, Joni Mitchell, Carole King. I was really into, and I also, because Daisy Jones' best friend is a disco star, and so I got really into like Donna Summer and Diana Ross and people like that. I started with listening to Rumors. That was the beginning of it for me, because it's an album, but it's also, and this is something that so many people have said, and you know, it's an album, but it's also a soap opera, right? Like, the stories going on between Stevie and Lindsey and the things that were going on between Christine McVie and John McVie are really fascinating, and they show in the music. So I started there. Well, and then I read a ton of interviews that Fleetwood Mac had given over the years. And from there, I moved on to Bruce Springsteen's memoir, Born to Run, which was amazing. And I really fell in love with Bruce Springsteen for the first time. I don't think I understood how much I had sort of always loved him until I read that book and I started listening to all of his music again. Then I got to Tom Petty and Dire Straits. And really the majority of the books that I read were biographies about all of these people whose music I had been listening to. Keith Richards, his autobiography was really helpful. There were like very small details that I could pull from a lot of these biographies that were things that I'm not a musician, and so there were just small details that I could find. For instance, in Keith Richards' biography, I think he mentioned something about how Wild Horses performed in a different type of tuning. It's called Nashville tuning, and I don't play guitar, and I don't know what any of these things mean, but I was like, oh, well, I don't know what that is, so let me go see what that is, and let me understand it. It's this small detail that I could then follow like a thread to understand how these musicians would be thinking about their music. If there's a rock biography that came out in recent years, I've read it. And then Rolling Stone interviews. I just bought on eBay just a stack of Rolling Stones from probably about 1970. I think they ranged from like the early 70s to the early 80s. And I just went through them. And the articles are great, but also the ads were great because it told you so much about the time period and the things that the musicians and the readers of Rolling Stone were interested in and were using and buying. When I decided that I wanted to write about musicians, I felt like the biggest hurdle was going to be that you have to feel like you can hear these songs. And how do you write about something as difficult to describe as the experience of listening to music? And so I started Googling, great books about rock, great novels about rock. And everything that came up was like, there's never been a good novel about rock. There can be no good rock drama written, as a book. And I got a little scared. And then I thought about, how do I like to learn about rock? And it's rock documentaries. That's the most fascinating piece. I want to hear from the people themselves what happened, what it felt like, how everything went wrong. And so the way to do that, the way to let all of these musicians tell you their story, was for me to get out of the way, in theory, and to write it as an oral history. I didn't know of any oral histories that were fiction, and there are some. I started to dig and I found a few, but there wasn't anything that was comparable to what I wanted to do. And so I really just used the format of oral history nonfiction. My husband had been reading a lot of oral histories. There was an oral history of Saturday Night Live that was really helpful. Oddly enough, an oral history of Nickelodeon. An oral history of the Hollywood agency CAA. So I was reading a lot of those and understanding that there is a format and a structure to these books, and then I could use that nonfiction structure to tell a fictional story. And what was really exciting to me is that there are certain presumptions that you make when you're reading an oral history like this. You assume that everyone is telling the truth. You assume that you know who's telling you the story. And I got really, really excited about the idea of subverting some of those assumptions, because this is fiction, and so I can make up whatever I want. So that was really fun. What was very important to me from the beginning of writing this book is that it was a story about women. 70s rock is such a male-dominated space typically. There aren't that many women that we think of during that time compared to how many men were making music during that time. It was very important to me that this book honor those women, the Stevie Nicks and the Christine McVies and the Patti Smiths and the Linda Ronstadts and Joni Mitchells and Carole Kings. Like, that was really exciting to me. And the other thing that was really important was telling a story that wasn't just about one way to be a woman, one set of priorities to have as a woman. I wanted to tell so many different stories of what it means to be a woman. And so Daisy and Camila and Karen and Simone are all very different, and they have different goals. And for me, at first, the most important person for me to understand was Daisy. It's called Daisy Jones and the Six. She's where we start. And I wanted to make sure that she was someone that I cared about and someone that I believed in, because I think that's the easiest way to make sure that the reader feels that way. I was deeply invested in her, and I was very protective of her, because she's a very vulnerable person. I hope that that shows on the page. Daisy is beautiful and rich, and so because of that, she has really no value of those things. She doesn't care about them, and she doesn't really care about the power that she wields because of them. She's entirely focused on being taken seriously as a lyricist. She wants to be an artist, and she's got an incredible voice, but again, it came easy to her, so she doesn't value it. She doesn't care. What she cares about is what she works hard at, and she wants people to listen to her songs, and she wants to be valued for her contribution. Very early on, she realizes that's what she wants to do, and she starts this songbook, and she's writing, she's doing these song sketches, and she gets a record deal. And she gets a record deal because she's beautiful and because she's got a great voice. And so they want her to do covers. And she goes in and she says, these are the songs that I want to do, I'm not doing covers. And they look through her sketchbook, and really she hasn't finished a song. She does little sketches here and there, but there's nothing that she's worked on over and over and perfected. And they say no, and she throws a big temper tantrum. But over the course of the story, she starts to understand that if she wants to be good at something, and she values it, which is the only thing that she really cares about, she has to work at it. And she works at it, and she will work on her songs over and over, and she takes it very seriously, and she changes, and she comes into herself as a lyricist. And then she meets Billy, and Billy takes himself very seriously as a lyricist. And he's always been taken seriously as a lyricist because it's a little bit easier for him as a man. And so when they are going to write an album together, Daisy really has to push to make sure that half of that album is hers, and that the things that they're singing about are things that she cares about. Billy does not want to hear it at first, and one of the things that I love about her is that when she figures out what she wants, she goes for it, and she will not be told no. And so this is a woman that by the end of that album, she can claim so much ownership of the things that they're singing, and she's put her whole heart into it. I don't actually think there is very much that's missing from the stories that women are telling about women. I think that women are doing a great job telling stories about women, about complicated women, flawed women. I think the problem is that our society is not taking them seriously enough, and we're dismissing them as fluff or unimportant, or women will read them but then feel like they need to be embarrassed about it. Stories about women are the most exciting stories that we're telling, and the most important stories that we're telling. And so I think if you look at what women are writing now, it's thrilling, and it's exciting, and it's complex. And I just wish we would take it a little bit more seriously. I wrote the lyrics, even though I've never written a song in my life, because I feel like one of the most exciting things about real rock and roll is that you know the story, and at the same time, the art may be telling you something else. That you can, for me, it was like Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham, they may say one thing, but what are the lyrics that they're writing about each other? And how does that inform the experience? And am I learning things or sort of guessing at things that are, little breadcrumbs that are being dropped? So I wanted the readers to have that experience with the album Aurora. Billy and Daisy are telling you sometimes differing things, sometimes the same thing, but are they telling the truth? And was the art that they were making during that time reflecting what they're saying now? Or are there little things hidden in there that feel like, oh, well, you say you didn't feel this way, but the lyrics tell me that maybe you did. I wanted it to feel like there was a puzzle or something that you could really sink into. Daisy Jones and the Six has sold to Hello Sunshine, which is Reese Witherspoon's production company. They will be making it into a limited series for Amazon, which is incredibly exciting. And it's also, for me, just very, very special because the people that will be adapting it are Scott Neustern and Michael Weber, who are these screenwriters that I have been a fan of for years. Literally, their first movie was 500 Days of Summer. And I remember going into that theater and just being completely swept away by it. I loved that movie. And so then they went on to do The Fault in Our Stars, which was like, I had to bring tissues to the movie theater. I was bawling my eyes out. And just recently they were nominated for an Oscar for The Disaster Artist. So I have so much respect for them, and I am so excited to see what they do with it. I feel like I have full trust in them to make this thing as great as it can be. I am a huge, huge fan of Madeline Miller, and a couple of years ago she had the Song of Achilles, which won the Orange Prize. So when her book Circe came out this year, I was like, I dropped everything. I was like, I will be doing nothing but reading this book. And my expectations were so high, and then I read it, and I loved it even more than I thought I was going to. I love everything that Madeline Miller does. I'm also a huge fan of Celeste Ng. I thought Little Fires Everywhere was fantastic. And I just read a book that I think, even though it's not 2019 yet, I think I'm ready to say like it's one of my favorites of 2019 because it doesn't come out until I think April. It's called The Editor by Stephen Rowley. And it's a story about a man in the 90s who sells his book to a major editor, and he finds out that that editor is Jackie Kennedy. And it's the story of him editing his book with the help of Jackie Kennedy. But it's really a story about mothers and sons. And I finished that book and I got to the end of it and I couldn't stop crying. And it just felt like there was so much catharsis, and I just felt so much better after having read it. And it was I just hugged it to my chest afterwards. Loved it.